I said, well, why? All the people died. And he said, well, because they've been pulverized, he said.
It was real personal. It was losing and not being able to find and not being able to help people that you really cared about.
In a hastily improvised setting, President Bush makes his second address to the nation.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
It was in a dark conference room. Secret Service wouldn't let him make a statement outside. I don't think most people remember what he said at that point, but the feeling was that the president had now not been seen for a couple of hours, and so he needed to be seen.
We will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans.
The president spoke for 2 or 3 minutes, turned and left. And they put me on briefly with Peter Jennings, the ABC News anchor.
The president has just made a statement, Peter, a very emotional one, saying that freedom will be defended. Let me know if we're being taken out of here. We may be scrambled out of here.
Okay.
Are we leaving? Okay, Peter, we are leaving. And
where are you going, Annie?
Peter, I have no idea.
Off you go, and Ann, thanks very much. We cannot state it often enough. He may be safe at 40,000 feet in Air Force One, but before long, the country is going to expect him to be back in Washington to send not just a message to those of us in the nation, but also to the other parts of the world where these enemies of the United States at the moment must surely think they have the United States on the run.
Our mission was over. My commander looked at me and he said, "Kurt, we are living a Tom Clancy novel."
Rudy Giuliani had a very keen understanding that what he said could set the tone for the rest of the country and somewhat of the world.
Today is obviously one of the most difficult days in the history of the city and the country.
The mayor wasn't going to answer a question as to how many people had died.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately.
He actually took a quasi-quote from the Book of Job and ended it just like that. He really wanted not to raise any additional fear, but to begin the process of healing that was necessary to happen.
And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than vicious, cowardly terrorists, and we're going to overcome this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mayor Giuliani's press conference signals a determination by America's leadership to try and regain control. In Washington, decision makers are under pressure to respond to the attacks.
President Bush said to me on the phone, he said, "Don, get ready. This is going to come to you, and get thinking about it."
Secretary Rumsfeld said, "Okay, what plans might we have on the shelf to deal with a situation like this?" And of course, the answer is there had been no plan developed against an organization like Al-Qaeda.
The Pentagon kept these so-called plans on the shelf, but they were in many cases old, which is not surprising. You can't keep everything up to the last minute. And in every instance, they involved nation states. They did not involve terrorist networks as such. And what you had to do was to figure it out from scratch.
I mean, it's a realization that we weren't as prepared as we needed to be.
Amid the confusions of 9/11, it's becoming clear that many of the systems and attitudes governing national defense are stuck in the Cold War. Military leaders and politicians are still planning for enemy states with ballistic missiles, rather than for terrorists who fly hijacked planes into buildings.
I think that Cold War mindset was still alive, and the way the military was trained and equipped through the Cold War pretty much is what you had in the 21st century. And I think it had some impact on the way we think.
In the counterterrorism agencies across Washington, the threat from al-Qaeda has been on the agenda for nearly a decade.
You could see it coming. You could see it coming, and I'm not saying that the politicians of the United States were not informed. They were informed, but it was not something that they understood very well.
Our main consideration with respect to terrorist attacks had been to treat them as law enforcement problems. We'd go out, we'd find the guilty party, we'd put them on trial, and then lock them up.
The people who came in to run national security for George Bush had been in his father's administration 8 years earlier. What I was trying to say to them was, the world has changed. The threat is from non-state actors like al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda will kill Americans, they have killed Americans, they're going to kill Americans, and that's what's going to blow up in your face. Get on top of that fast. We might as well have been talking to a wall.
Leading up to 9/11, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, look what happened. It was consummation of everything that we'd been led to believe that we had reported. The briefings were regular, they were pretty strident, they were pretty forceful. They went through the June period into the July period. That was basically a catastrophic tipping point. We briefed the National Security Council Director, Condoleezza Rice, and I sort of slid my chair a little bit closer to the table. And I said, this country has got to go on a war footing now, as I slammed my fist in the desk. Such is life. The question always is, what happened after that?
As America's leaders prepare to brief the president on how he should respond to the assaults, the long-matured plans of Washington's counterterrorism specialists have a new urgency.
It went from instant combustion of here's the attack to now we have to go into preempt, disrupt, and defeat mode. We'd been working on this for years. We had our plans pretty well developed to find, fix, and engage all al-Qaeda worldwide.
On the afternoon of 9/11, as Air Force One makes another landing, America's intelligence and security chiefs are racing to gather information about the attacks for President Bush. Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, 1,000 miles from Washington, D.C., is a secure nuclear base where America's leaders could be evacuated in the event of a nuclear war. Six hours after the beginning of the attack on the Twin Towers, President Bush will at last confer with his key decision-makers.
We pulled up in front of an enormous headquarters building. We piled out of the car at the same moment the president stepped from his, and instead of going anywhere near the building, he turned to a small cinder block building. It looked like a shack. The president went in, and his advisors went in, and the Secret Service went in, and some military went in. It was quite obviously not a building big enough to hold all of them. We figured it must be the access to the underground bunker.
Watching the president disappear into a bunker and then a very thick steel door shut behind him, it's something about that, really hit home.
Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I can.
What are you doing in Nebraska?
Well, we didn't know where we were till we landed. President Bush is here at the home of the Strategic Command, and he has disappeared down the rabbit hole, Peter.
It just came out, I said, and he's going down the rabbit hole.
In 27 years of covering presidents and crises, we have never played the kind of hunted game that was played today.
We proceeded down to a very secure conference room where we had established the feeds for the cabinet meeting.
Before the video conference begins, the president announces that he's reached a decision.
We could see him on the video walking into the room, and I was supposed to brief him on the status of things. And before I could do that, he said, "The plane is being refueled. We're coming back to Washington. That's not up for discussion. Now, Dick, give the briefing." I essentially went through the decisions we had already made. We've grounded all the aircraft. We've put up fighter aircraft. We've closed all the borders. We've put all our military bases around the world on full alert. We've closed all the embassies around the world. We've declared continuity of government emergency. We've taken the Speaker of the House away from Congress and hid him in a cave somewhere. Nothing that we were reporting to him had ever been done in history before.
The president says this has to be different. They have to know that we are at war and that we're willing to do what we need to do to deal with this threat.
CIA Director George Tenet informs the president that al-Qaeda is responsible for the 9/11 attacks.
The intelligence community had figured out what actually had taken place, and George Tenet spoke with considerable authority that that was his conviction.
The president says, hey, this happened on my watch, this is intolerable, we're at war, and we can deal with this.
Many of the president's colleagues are still advising him to stay away from Washington.
The president was not happy about that, and I recall very specifically that he literally slapped the papers that were on the table in front of him and said, "I'm going back."